Have you heard of one Humpty Dumpty? How he fell with a roll and a rumble, and fell off like a doll of a crumple by the butt of the magazine wall.
Welcome to James Joyce's divine and delirious comedy, Finnegans Wake. In this episode, number 11, we'll hear Irish-Canadian actor and my good friend and colleague Richard Harte performing pages 48 to 53 to begin Chapter 3 of Joyce's last novel. I'm Adam Seelig, the director of the reading you'll soon hear. I'm sharing the good news that One Little Goat Theatre Company recently released our film of Finnegans Wake Chapter 1 online this fall. After several festival screenings last year, it's now out for all to watch. You can find it on YouTube or through our website, and I'll link to it in the podcast transcript, which is also on our website, www.onelittlegoat.org. For the listeners who've enjoyed Richard reading Chapter 1 on our podcast, you can now enjoy seeing the face and body that go with the voice. The film also contains a handful of montages shot in Toronto, where the reading took place, thematically connecting some places in the city with some moments in the chapter. Happy watching and listening. And some more good news that we recently wrapped our film shoot of Finnegans Wake Chapter 5, shot with a wonderful live audience at the Thomas Fisher Rare Books Library in Toronto. Surrounded by dozens of volumes related to Chapter 5 and The Wake, from an original King James Bible to Sir Edward Sullivan's The Book of Kells, it was a special evening that will make for a terrific podcast and film in future. I want to extend a special thanks to the two regular podcast listeners who schlepped up from New Jersey and Massachusetts to join us for the reading. I'm delighted you were with us on that night. And finally, as I record this in December of 2024, One Little Goat, a registered charity in the United States and Canada, is fundraising so we can keep offering our programming. For over 20 years, we've been producing poetic theater of the highest caliber, which wouldn't be possible without the generous support of individuals like you. We love producing these recordings and films of Finnegans Wake. At the same time, they require money to produce, so please, if you're financially able, take a moment to donate through our website, onelittlegoat.org, and click on Contact and Donate. All donations made by December 31st will receive an official tax receipt. Many, many thanks to all of you who have already donated to One Little Goat. We really appreciate your support. Finnegans Wake is a production of One Little Goat Theatre Company. For the next 5 years, One Little Goat will film and record all 17 chapters, roughly 30 hours, of Joyce's Finnegans Wake before live audiences in various locations, screening and releasing them along the way with the aim of completing the entire book in time for its 90th birthday, May the 4th of 2029. One Little Goat Theatre Company is an official charity in Canada and the United States. If you'd like to support our work, please visit us online at www.onelittlegoat.org to make a charitable donation. And if monetary support is not an option, you can still help this podcast by rating and reviewing it and by spreading the word. To get in touch, you'll find our email address on the One Little Goat Theatre Company website, and we'd love to hear from you. Here we are at Chapter 3 of Finnegans Wake. I'm going to touch on the chapter's theme of fleeing, then highlight how the 19th century Irish nationalist Charles Stewart Parnell informs the character of Earwicker and the Wake, and then offer a quick synopsis of the 5 pages you'll soon hear Richard Harte read. As I've said in previous episodes, if you'd like to jump straight to Richard's performance, by all means skip ahead. Chapter 1 served as an overture to Finnegans Wake, sounding out among its many motifs the cyclical fall and rise of humanity. Chapter 2 introduced us to Earwicker, or HCE, including his alleged sin in Phoenix Park and the wildfire rumors that consequently spread across Dublin and Ireland, culminating in the salacious and slanderous public performance of The Ballad of Perce O'Reilly by the muck-raking street busker Hosty. In Chapter 3, we'll find Earwicker trying to run and hide from all the earwigging gossip surrounding and hounding him. As a lyric from Bob Marley's 1978 Kaya puts it, "You're running and you're running and you're running away, but you can't run away from yourself." Earwicker is not only running away, perhaps he's running away from himself. As Joyce's admirer and occasional amanuensis Samuel Beckett said of his own work, perhaps might be the most important word. Likewise with Finnegans Wake. perhaps Chapter 3 is an evocation of Earwicker's unconscious, his own dream state, and he's not only being chased, but also the one doing the chasing through invented characters of his own imagining. In this way, in addition to the cyclical rise and fall at the core of the novel, which we can picture vertically as Tim Finnegan's rise and fall from the ladder, or Humpty Dumpty's wall fall, or the phoenix up from the ashes, or Adam and Eve's biblical apple grab, Finnegan's Wake adds a similar cyclical loop, which we can picture horizontally as Earwicker running away, perhaps from himself, across Dublin. Could Earwicker be his own worst enemy, chasing and biting his own tail, a self-persecuting Ouroboros? Consider for a moment that Hosty's caustic ballad, which utterly defames Earwicker at the end of Chapter 2, is titled The Ballad of Perce O'Reilly. Perce O'Reilly is French for earwig, leading us to The Ballad of Earwig, and by extension to The Ballad of Earwicker, which we can now hear in two ways: the ballad about Earwicker and the ballad by Earwicker. The title's ingenious preposition of The Ballad of Perce O'Reilly allows us to hear and experience the song as a throwdown that could be simultaneously about and by Earwicker, the deliverer and recipient, the subject and object of the musical invective, with Hosty an invention of Earwicker's own imagination. Perhaps. Regardless of whether Earwicker is persecuted by others or by himself, one thing is, perhaps, for sure. Earwicker in Chapter 3 is, quote, subjected to the horrors of the premier terror of Errorland. Perhaps. So is he purely victim, or is he also victimizer? Who is Earwicker? As you'll hear in today's excerpt, the narrative of Chapter 3 pursues the answer by attempting to tease out the identity of our elusive protagonist from the scandalous fog that surrounds him. Quote, given the wet and low visibility, close quote, and, quote, the average human cloudy fizz, close quote, it's a considerable challenge to, quote, identify the individual. In short, as Earwicker runs and hides, Chapter 3 will be asking not only where he is, but who. An elusive protagonist hounded by scandal. This may serve as a description of Earwicker, but it could just as easily describe the 19th century Irish nationalist Charles Stewart Parnell. Earwicker is the talk of the town. Parnell was, and in many ways still is, the talk of the Irish nation. Since Parnell's political rise and ignominious fall provide another facet for understanding Earwicker and the Wake, I'm going to share Adeline Glasheen's brilliant entry on this larger-than-life figure of modern Irish history. Charles Stewart Parnell, born in 1846, died in 1891. Betrayed Irish leader who haunts Joyce's works just about everywhere. In Joyce, Parnell is not a character but a presence, ghost, shade. There was a legend that Parnell would return magically like the Phoenix, Finn, Christ, or unmagically like Ulysses, Tim Finnegan. Parnell was an Anglo-Irish landowner, a skilled political boss who led the Irish Nationalist Party in the British Parliament. He frightened the British, and they set out to destroy him. Their first try, the Piggott Affair, failed, but they succeeded when Captain William O'Shea sued his wife, Catherine or Kitty O'Shea, with whom Parnell had an affair and 3 children, for divorce. Parnell was revealed as an adulterer, a user of false names, a sneaker down fire escapes or ladders. The rest, Glasheen writes, may be quoted from The Shade of Parnell. He was deposed in obedience to Gladstone's orders. Of his 83 representatives, only 8 remained faithful. The high and low clergy entered the lists to finish him off. The Irish press emptied on him and the woman he loved the vials of their envy. The citizens of Castlecomer threw quicklime in his eyes. He went from county to county, from city to city, like a hunted deer, a spectral figure. Within a year, he died. Glasheen goes on. He was by no means innocent of forging his own destruction. Whether from hubris or from not changing his wet socks, he died. And note all the, quote, idle with feet of clay, close quote, jokes in Ulysses and Finnegans Wake. Parnell pervades and appears in moments of intensity, but he is not, after all, often named in Finnegans Wake. Parnell's presence is then indicated by indirection, by quoting, by recreating one of his scenes, by using certain words, for example, tree shade, chief, fox, which call him up even when those words are used in ways that do not directly apply to him. Parnell was elusive. He is elusive in Joyce's pages. Chapter 3 opens with applause for Hoste's Ballad of Perce O'Reilly, which closed Chapter 2, with particular praise for the street busker's impressive, quote, chest C, close quote, a high C sung by old-fashioned tenors. And indeed, in my co-arrangement of the ballad with Richard in Chapter 2, when Richard, as Hoste, sings the song's last word, Cain, he ultimately ends on a high concert C. Aren't we clever? And since C can stand for Cain, Abel's lethal brother, it may come as no surprise that issuing from the exhalation of that final Cain-charged chest C is a deadly, toxic cloud. Quote, a poisoning volume of cloud barrage indeed, close quote. This fog, or spit fog, if you will, clouds the beginning of this chapter. It's a fog so thick that even my regular trusted guides, Epstein, Tyndall, and company, seem to differ on what is happening here. So don't worry in the least if we get a little lost as we try to discern a thing or two in the foggy and fascinating paragraphs ahead. I'll also quickly add that Chapter 3 opens with fog and closes with rain. I'll come back to this drizzle that bookends Chapter 3 when we reach its conclusion in Episode 15. As the poisonous cloud spreads, we hear of how various scandal-mongers who sang the toxic ballad ultimately expire, starting with Hoste, here described sing-songily, or maybe amid all the fog, sing-soggily, as, quote, poor Osty Frosty, close quote. I don't believe this series of men from Hoste to O'Hara to Paul Horan to Sordid Sam and so on dies as a result of having sung the ballad. The correlation strikes me as more coincidental than causal, but the association between the song and their deaths reminds me of Monty Python's Killer Joke sketch, also known as The Funniest Joke in the World, which I would love to tell you, but of course anyone who reads or hears the joke promptly dies from laughter, so I will prudently link to it online in this podcast's transcript. Enjoy at your own risk. There are a few choice phrases that I'd like to point out as you listen. Quote, his husband, close quote, always catches my ear. It's not uncommon to hear these two words together today in Ireland and beyond where gay marriage is legal, but when Joyce combined them, his husband was unheard of and arguably ridiculous, yet a century ahead of its time. Quote, loquacity, lunacy, close quote, is another favorite phrase that seems to address this hyper-verbal, logomaniacal world in which we find ourselves. And we'll hear a euphemistic description for a central theme of Finnegans Wake, gossip, that social phenomenon by which people like Earwicker and Parnell are, quote, semi-privately convicted, close quote. Following this string of histrionic obituaries, we can discern within the fog a hazy remix of Earwicker's confrontation in Phoenix Park from Chapter 2, a recurring event in the novel that plays out through different iterations of the cad, the two girls, and the three soldiers, the male actors intimating violence, the females' temptation, and all suggesting the ambiguous sin committed, if committed at all, by Earwicker. Here the controversial contingent of one cad, two girls, and three soldiers will appear as, quote, the haberdasher, the two kerchies, and the three enkelchums, the main initials of which, incidentally, form Earwicker's monogram, HCE. On the same page, page 51, the 7 items of clothing motif, which occurs in chapters 1 and 2 as well, will invoke Earwicker dressed, quote, in scratch wig, square cuts, stock, lavalier, regattable oxeter, baggy pants, and shufflers. In the paragraph beginning with sports a common thing, we will hear about Earwicker's Regifugium Persecutorum, a term that provides a key to this chapter. Roland McHugh's indispensable annotations to Finnegans Wake breaks it down as follows. Regifugium is an ancient Roman ceremony celebrating the expulsion of kings that literally means flight of the king. Refugium peccatorum means refuge of sinners from the Roman Catholic litany of the Blessed Virgin Mary. And persecutorum means of the persecuted. So Earwicker's Regifugium Persecutorum represents his expulsion and his refuge, his sin and his persecution, his running and his hiding. Indeed, by chapter's end, we will find our protagonist holed up behind some fortification, seeking refuge from 111 expulsive and expletive insults hurled his way. That will be episode 15. We then experience an early newsreel via television, still a young technology at the time of Joyce's writing, and again we'll encounter Earwicker in another 7 articles of clothing, including, quote, the refaced unmentionables of gingerine hue, close quote, which sounds to me like his patched up reddish underwear. The newsreel also briefly introduces the, quote, brothers' broil, close quote, that plays out between HCE and ALP's oppositional sons, Sean and Shem, in chapter 6 onward. One last note before we get to Richard's reading. We have a heckler in the house, or at least in the text of chapter 3. Wyndham Lewis, 1882 to 1957, the brilliant Canadian-born English modernist author and painter and foil of sorts to James Joyce, makes his first intrusions in today's excerpt. Lewis, incidentally, escaped during the Second World War to a Regifugium Persecutorum of his own in Canada, including a stint in my town of Toronto, which he considered, perhaps justifiably, a miserable backwater. Lewis butts in throughout chapter 3 and can barely keep his mouth shut later on in chapter 6. For today's excerpt, he limits his contributions to 2 parenthetical monosyllabic insults, or what my kids would call sick burns. The first is cogged, i.e. fraudulent, and the second, which also serves as the last word of today's reading, is prigged, i.e. stolen. Now it's time for Richard's performance of James Joyce's Finnegans Wake, page 48, line 1 to page 53, line 6 for the beginning of chapter 3. The performance was shot and recorded at my home in Toronto on October 2nd, 2023 with a live audience. The film premiered at the Toronto Irish Film Festival, European Union Film Festival, and Bloomsday Film Festival at the James Joyce Centre in Dublin. The opening music for the chapter is my own arrangement of The Ballad of Percy O'Reilly, with Brandon Bach on drums and yours truly on piano.
Corpo di Bellagio, you spoof of visibility in a freak fog of mixed sex cases among goats, hill cat, and plain mousey. Bigamy Bob and his ill shan that. The Blackfriars treacle plaster outrage belittled. Therewith was released in that king's rick of Hill Media, a poisoning volume of cloud barrage indeed. Yet are they who heard nor re-delivered are now with that family of bards and Virgo Bratas himself, and the crowd of caraculacticers as much no more as be they not yet now, or had they then not ever been. Can be in some future we shall hear amid the zouave players of Inkerman, the Mime, Mum and the Mick, and his Nick, Mime and their Maggies, Hinton St. Just, Mr. Frank Smith,
If Arn St. Austell, Mr. J.F. Jones, Coleman of Look and taken 4 parts, a query of the O'Daly O'Doyles, double sixing the chorus in Fen MacCall and the 7 Theories of Lockleach, Galloper Trappler and Hurley Quinn, the zither of the past with his merryman all, zim zim, zim zim. Of the person sin is here a Wiggler saga, which thorough readable to int from ant is from Tudge Bodden, all false tissues, anti-libelous and non-actionable, and this applies to its whole volume. Of poor Asti Frosty, described as quite a musical genius in a small way, and the owner of an exceedingly nice ear, a tenorous voice to match, not alone but a very major poet of the poorly meritary order. He began to Unisonian but worked his passage up as far as we all hang together any man the voice. No one end is known. If they whistled him before he had his curtains up, they are whistling him still after his curtains doom's doom. His husband, poor old O'Hara, crestfallen by things, and down at hills at the time they squeak, accepted the Zasnach, Adri's Shannon at the conclusion of the Crimean War, and having flown his wild geese, alone in crowds to wander on like Shuley Looney, enlisted in Tyrone's horse, the Irish Whites, soldiered a bit with Wolsey under the assumed name of Blanco Fuzilovno Buklovich. Spurious. After which the coward and the marble house of Pumpcourt Columbarium, the home of the old Seekings, looked upon each other and quaith their haven evermore. For it transpires that on the other side of the water it came about that on the field of Vasilov's Cornix, inauspiciously with his unit, he perished, saying, "This paper leafless to old chap give, raw chocolates from Mowther and Low." Bewill. Poor old dear Paul Horan, to satisfy his literary as well as his criminal aspirations, at the suggestion thrown out by the doomster in loquacity lunacy, so says the Dublin Intelligence, was thrown into a Ridley's for inmates in the northern counties. Under the name of Orony, he may have been the utility man of the troop capable of sustaining long parts at short notice. He was. So did Sam, a dour, decent deblancer, the unwashed, haunted always by his ham, the unwished. At a word from Israfel the summoner, passed away painlessly after life's ups and downs one Halloween night, ebrous and in the state of nature, propelled from behind into the great beyond by foot blows, cowling clouted upon his oyster and Atlas on be hanged and be hooved and be hicked and be hooked of his last fish and blood bed scrappers, an Northwegian and his mate of the she-wolving class. Though the last straw glimpsed his bearing, the stage thunk hard to said, the pitfall gagged him as prompt boxer to have solemnly said, as had the brief thought, but fell into his head like a base drop neck fussed into the bone crate. Cogged. Me dreams of Laughlin's has come true. Now let the centupled selves of my ego urge, as Miculus de Cusa calls them, of all of whose I, in my hereinafter, of course by recourse, dimission me, by the coincidence of their contraries re-amalgamerge in that indentity of undiscernibles, where the Baxters and the Fleshmans, may they cease the benevolence, and... But at this point, though the iron thrust of his cocksport start might have prepared us, we're well nigh stink pathered by the mustard punch in his tail end. This out tanned and brown candlestock melt Nolans into peas, and var. Disliking as he was the dreary old drama, her wife Langley, the prophet, and the deece with this dozen short of a frusker, whoever stuck his spigot through his spoke, disappeared. In which to do it, he has taken all the French leaves unavailable out of calumny Quiller's pravities from the sour face of this earth that Austral plain he had transmarried himself to so entirely spuriously. The mother of the book with a dusk-whisk tabula res in his obliteration done upon her and volucrum has to tickle the speculative to all but a point, since the levy, who might have been Langley, may have really been a redivivis of pagan, and it's a more volunteer fool's den that the hobo, who possessed a large amount of the humoresque, had transtuled his funster's latatat to its finsterest and terramost. Riche. Again, if Father Sam Brown, tea and toaster to that quaintest of yarn spinners, is Padre Don Bruno, true and troster to the Queen of Irish Spain, was the Reverend, the Sodality Director, that eupeptic voice flare, a barefaced Carmelite, to whose palpitating pulpit, which of us but remembers that rare, valent and honourable Fredo Mr. Northern Morning Brawn, sin in society, sirens, see the Roman Catholic Prespassum, fortunately became so enthusiastically attached, and was an objectionable ass who very occasionally cockaded a raffles ticket on his hat, which he wore all to one side like the handle of his pan. If her elegance saw him, she'd have the canary. And was semi-privately convicted of malpractices with his hot-washed table knife, glossing over the cork in his pocket. That the same snob of the dunghill, fully several years shams riper, encountered by the General on that red letter morning or May noon Jove's Day, and were they? Few it. When Fishlin Phil once throws his lip, 'tis folly to be fortune fountain, and whoever's got the mixed hotel by the salt sea water, there's next to nothing we can do, for he's never again to see. It is nebulous and autodidact fact of the commonest that the shape of the average human cloudy fizz, whereas sallow as long days faded, frequently altered its ego with the passing of the showers. Not original. Whence it is a slopperish matter, given the wet and low visibility, since in this girth out of 1,001 nesses, that sword of certainty, which would identify the body, never falls. To identify the individual one in scratch wig, square cut, stock lavalier, regattable Exeter, baggy pants and shufflers, he is often alluded to as Sly Patrick, the lad in the lane, with an already incipient lust in the direction of area baldness. One is continually first meeting with odd sorts of others at all sorts of ages, who was asked by free board school shirkers in trench coats over a wall, Will Con and Adam, to tell them over the gate, ball puff deaf, that fish-a-bed goat story of the hardy creditable Edlin tires of the haberdasher, the 2 courtiers and the 3 ankle chums in their bearskin goats. Girls and youngers, but he has changed a lot in Tark's time. Yada tra gallery pen shows of that okey boko night. Those many warts, those slummy patches have since their wrinkles. What has come over the face of whole brother E? And shrine of Mount New Savers, the large fungal parky has grown. Drink. Sport's a common thing. It was the Lord's own day for Dap. To wait for a postponed regatta's eventualising is not of Battlecock, Shettledore, Euxtamari only. And the request for a fully armed explanation was put, in lieu of Pat, to the party. A native of Meathman or Meccan, by his brogue, ex-race eyes, local colour and local odour, which are said to have been average clown Turkish. Though the capeless voice, nasal liquids, and the way he sneezed its ears haul us back to the crows and brins of the Silurian Ordovices, who, the lesser pilgrimage accomplished, had made pets and pigs older than Celt, the southeast bluffs of the stranger step shore, a regifugium persecutorum, hence hindquarters. As he paused at even chime for some or so minutes, hit the pipe, Danny boy. Time to one, barman. I take 10 to win. Amid the devil's one doldrum, Apple by her blossom window, and Charlotte at her toss panamancy, his sole admirers, his only tarts in store. For a fragrant calabash during his weekend pastime of executing with any oakley deadliness. Consummatory pairs of provocatives, of which remain provokingly but 2. The ones he fell for, Lily and Tutu, Corkum. Empties, which had not very long before contained Reed's family. You ruined that before, Sulky, but all the battles in sodden history will not soften your blood of thirst. Stout. Having reprimed his repeater, and rested the room his timepiece, his revenances, with still a life or 2 to spare for the space of his occupancy of a world at a time, rose to his feet, and there, far from Togaheim, in a quiet English garden, commonplace, since known as Whittington Wild, his simple, intensive, curling vocality, my dear brothers, my most dear brothers, as he, so is a supper as is a sipper, spake of the one, and told of the compassionate, called up before the triad of precocious scare-makers, score taken, spegging on nae help as a nabellulo, me credas qui estas prava, via do televisago. Respondas Fräuleino, the now to us here mythical habiliments of our far, far, and our thought of our doin. Television kills telephony and brothers broil. Our eyes demand their turn. Let them be seen. And wolf-bone balefires blaze with frail most, if that Mary nothing may burst her baby book she. And they set fire, then she's got to glow, so we may stand some chances of warmth what every circa batch of Tom or home would like to know. The first Humphrey's latitudinous beaver with puggery behind. Calaboose belong, Big Boss belong, Kang the Tall, his forehand bow, his elbow room sort out, the refaced unmentionables of gingerine hue, the state slate umbrella, his gruff Wolseley Wellesley with the Findrin crofts and the gauntlet upon the hand, which in an hour not for him solely evil had struck down the mighty might have been despair, of whom his nation seemed almost already to be about to have need. Then, stealing his thunder, but in the befitting legomena of the smaller country, probable words, possibly said, a field, family gleaming, a bit duskish and flavoured with a smile, seeing as how his thoughts consisted chiefly of the cheerio. The aptly sketch for our soon-to-be second parents, suck and see why, the touching scene, the solence of that stilling. Here one might have Finn fell, booms to a bum and on. It seemed like a landscape from Wilder Pittoresque, or some scene on some dim arras, dumb as mum's mutinous. This mimage of the 77th cousin of Christensen is audible to us across the windless air, no odour, no more eerie, nor less potent of suggestion than in the tales of the Tingmount. Prigged.
That was Richard Harte reading the beginning of Chapter 3 from Finnegans Wake, pages 48 to 53, recorded live in Toronto on October 2nd, 2023. Join us for episode 12 in a fortnight when Richard continues with the next 5 pages of Chapter 3, including the Casa Concordia paragraph, one of my favorites, which features Finnegans Wake at its polyglottally ludicrous best. To be sure you don't miss the episode, why not follow or subscribe to this podcast? For more on One Little Goat's Finnegans Wake project, including transcripts of this podcast, the complete film of Chapter 1, and trailers for others, visit our website at onelittlegoat.org. And to hear about upcoming performances and screenings, join our mailing list, also on our website. One Little Goat Theatre Company is a non-profit, artist-driven registered charity in the United States and Canada that depends on donations from individuals to make our productions, including this one, possible. If you're able, please make a tax-deductible donation through our website, www.onelittlegoat.org. See you in 2 weeks, and wishing you happy holidays. Finnegans Wake is made possible by friends of One Little Goat Theatre Company and the Emigrant Support Programme of the Government of Ireland. Thank you for your support. And thank you to the artists for this episode: Richard Harte, sound by William Bembridge, podcast production by Sean Rasmussen, stage management by Sandi Becker, directed by yours truly, Adam Seelig. Music arranged and performed on the piano by me, with Brandon Bach on drums, and recorded at Sound Department in Toronto. A big thanks to our wonderful live audience of Sandi Becker, David Mackett, Andrew Moody, Kathy Murphy, Nomi Rotbard, Arlo Rotbard-Seelig, Adam Seelig, Aaron Tucker, and Catherine Veneri. Thank you to everyone at the Irish Consulate in Toronto. Thank you to production consultants Kathy Murphy and Andrew Moody, and to music consultants Warwick Hart and Kevin Kennedy. Thank you for listening.